Thanks all for your attendance today as well. Thank you for sticking with it and being here on the last day of the conference as well. It's a nice filled room. So I'm going to get the button wrong, as did my other colleagues. As Sarah mentioned, I'm the Chief Commercial Officer at Orchard. We are a pure play autologous hematopoietic stem cell gene therapy company. We are largely focused in rare and ultra-rare diseases, in primary immune deficiencies, in neurometabolic disorders, and to some degree also in hemoglobinopathies. Some of the data has been presented here this week from some of our work in proof of concept. Got it right. There are forward-looking statements. I'd be remiss, and my general counsel would be upset if I didn't show you this slide. I'm sure you've read many similar phrases in other presentations. As I mentioned, we really focus on rare disease, and we're looking to try to bring therapies to people who desperately need them. In some instances, there are really no solutions from a therapeutic perspective for a lot of these children, teenagers, and adults. Some of them are palliative. Many of the diseases that we're studying therapies for are degenerative. I'll share with you some information around metachromatic leukodystrophy, for example, where it's truly an irreversible disease, and from onset the decline is really a sickening one, one of imminent death. Whether that's in a newborn child or a 1-year-old who may see death within approximately 5 years, or a person who's 25 years of age and lives for 15 years but really has the same end-of-life picture. This is what we're passionate about. This is similar to many of my colleagues on the panel, what we believe we should be working toward every day of the week. In doing this, we develop therapies. Similar to my fellow colleagues on the panel, to many people in the room, from many different types of stakeholders, whether they be companies, academic institutions, young fledgling startup companies as well. And really, this is wonderful data. And I think it's very much the power of gene therapy that we've been talking about so far this morning. The word curative is thrown out there. There's some hesitation in some of our voices to say that at times. It's not something we've touched on in our industry for a long, long time. There's certainly been the advent decades ago in bone marrow transplantation, but I think that what we're striving to do in gene therapy is to make this much more accessible to a lot more people with a lot higher diversity of diseases. But really, what's behind these diseases? We're talking about in ADA SCID, in MLD, and then in Wiskott-Aldrich syndrome to the far right. We're talking about patients, people, and families who are impacted with multiple, numerous, and intensive hospitalizations. Not just ones to go to the emergency department, sometimes to be admitted through the emergency department, frequently to be taken to ICU, not just to be seen by their immunologist, their neurologist, or really people that we go to frequently, a general practitioner or a pediatrician. They're seen by social workers, occupational therapists, physical therapists, an onslaught of nurses both in hospital and at home as well. They're dealing with durable medical equipment at home, on the go. This is surrounding a life. And really, gene therapy represents the opportunity to change that life and to be truly transformational, and to also change the way that the healthcare system itself is regarding these therapies. So I think the top line of a piece of advice that you're hearing from us all is start now. You have all of the typical aspects in dealing with either a rare disease or a truly innovative chronic therapy around distribution. There's just a little bit more complexity. That's what you're hearing from us. Certainly within the rare disease area, patient identification is of the utmost importance, and we've known that for really over a decade in our industry. But it's not just identifying the patient, understanding where a patient is in the progression of a disease, particularly helping a family and the physician who may just be referring to a center of excellence, as some of my colleagues have mentioned, understand what is entailed in utilizing one of these gene therapies. In our case, at Orchard, in autologous HSC gene therapy, it's quite complicated. It is an ex vivo application of gene therapy where we are harvesting cells at a center. Potentially the patient is going home. That home could be states away in the case of the United States, outside the U.S., that could be countries away as well, if not just regions or states within a country. So there is a tremendous amount of complexity from the very beginning, because it's not just in the cell harvest, but it's in a physician and a family making a decision, and a potentially life-changing decision, a very large responsibility to go somewhere else outside their normal sort of scope of life. In addition to that, we're taking someone's cells, we're sending them somewhere else into another country. We're doing it at 2 to 8 in our case. We're transducing or affecting a change genetically to those cells, and we're sending them back. And in our case, it's similarly at a cryopreserved status at minus 196. It's not the easiest thing to do. And in addition to that, also take into consideration that child, that juvenile, that adult, that family, that physician is also wondering, dear Lord, are we going to get back the same cells? We're given a lot of trust as industry, and we need to not just start to understand today the importance of every step along the way, track and trace, as there's a lot of different discussions here this week around that topic, but also, what is coming back? And the larger implication of then being reinfused those cells and the potential for a life-changing opportunity and transformation clinically. So there's probably 4 particular topics that we focus on most frequently at Orchard. We've had the great opportunity for just about a year now, a little bit more than that, of having Strimvelis, as we did an asset acquisition from GlaxoSmithKline in April of last year, and shepherding that product. And number one, assuring that we don't just have continued access to that therapy, but doing our best to continue to find even more patients with ADA SCID, and assure that we not just learn from for the benefit of our future portfolio, but also expand access to more countries and more patients for that product. At the same time, we do have, over the course of the next 3 years, the very strong ambition of bringing to market 3 therapies for ADA SCID, a second one, which is an Orchard homegrown therapy that we look to try to launch in the U.S. first. We then have a therapy for metachromatic leukodystrophy and one for Wiskott-Aldrich, all the data that I showed a couple slides ago. No different than my other colleagues, we talk about patient identification and diagnosis frequently. We do have a couple of diseases inclusive of ADA SCID where there is some newborn screening available today. A lot of work has been done over the last 10, 12 years to get to that point here in the US, and that is expanding now in other countries, in Norway, in Germany, and pilots in other countries. We do also do a lot, as you could expect, with respect to coordination of care. Being an ex vivo approach, it's on our minds constantly. As I'll mention in the next slide, 2 slides from now, there's a lot more to it because the number of stakeholders is pretty significant, to say the least. Clearly, not just for reimbursement purposes, for logistical purposes, and for educational purposes, family support is of the utmost importance. And even starting early is critical, just to try to align on and understand and listen, most critically to what the community is telling us. Listening to not just the caregivers and the patients, but all of the stakeholders who are surrounding them, who have insight and can help us understand what can we do better and how do we improve over a period of time. And then finally, as is the hot topic for us in gene therapy, access. And clearly, price is an important point. I had the privilege of speaking on a panel last year really around value and price, and certainly, an aim at Orchard to be truly transparent and being able to both quantitatively and qualitatively describe value. I think that's obviously a topic on all our minds, but very importantly, it's reimbursement, and I think it's really payment plans, I guess is the right term that a lot of us are using. So to step forward a bit, as I mentioned briefly, newborn screening, it would be a wonderful and amazing option for every disease out there. Even if some of us had a predisposition to Sever syndrome, like one of my daughters, it'd be wonderful to know that in advance. And to some degree, it's a little bit frightening potentially, but I think we would understand how to accommodate that just on our general lives. But certainly for fatal diseases like metachromatic leukodystrophy, it is without doubt where we need to be. We need to be doing our best to be treating patients, hopefully with our soon-to-be approved therapy in MLD, even before onset occurs. Why would we want to potentially subject a child, a teenager, or even an adult who's already functioning out in the world? Why would we want them to be exposed to even the first steps of a neurodegenerative disorder with imminent death? It doesn't really make any sense. We also know that there's the potential that they could have the most optimal outcomes in that setting as well. But newborn screening, as I think most of us know in the room, and maybe some more than others, it's not a one-step, 1 month, even 1 year, and sometimes it's a 1-decade process to get to newborn screening. There's a lot of progress being made even globally, where we see a lot of receptivity amongst different countries, inclusive of here in the US, to leverage data from pilot studies, not just within the US, but from other countries as well. But we're a long ways away. We have to develop an assay. We have to say that that assay is cost effective down to the couple of dollars range for it to be acceptable. We also have to see that that assay can be utilized in multiple laboratories, not always easy. And you can see that really at the heart of this, it's not a company. We can certainly try to support these efforts and even help to support the coordination and the financial support for these efforts, but we cannot take this forward. It's really the work of very strong advocates and leadership within the patient community that is truly the unheralded leader and champion in this setting. At the same time, as you're hearing from my colleagues, there have got to be other diagnostic approaches. It would be unacceptable for us to say, let's not provide a gene therapy for this intractable, irreversible disorder only after newborn screening is available. That is, without doubt, not just unethical, but really presents a social dilemma. Why are we developing gene therapies otherwise? It makes no sense. And so from our perspective, the practicality is there's the short term, must get a diagnostic approach out there. And as my colleagues already mentioned, how do we talk about the disease? How do we look at clinical diagnosis? How do we identify the most suspicious people out there who should be tested, whether that's genetics or another biochemical marker with confirmatory genetics or whatever it might be? That's got to start now, because newborn screening may take a number of years to be implemented. And if you think about it, a child, a newborn who is diagnosed with MLD 5 years from now, let's say, if newborn screening were available, what about the 5-year-old 5 years from now who could not go through newborn screening? The short term is really part of the mid to long term strategy that we need to think of in patient identification and making sure that we can at least give the option of gene therapy as early as possible in the clinical presentation and pathway of that 5, 10, 15, and even 30 or 45-year-old patient. The longer term is clearly, you've actually got to get started now with newborn screening. Just development of an assay can take years, and it's frequently where a lot of very strong and robustly supported newborn screening efforts have faltered, actually. It's in the robustness of that assay, it's in the transferability of that assay, it's in the accessibility or the per patient cost of that assay. It would really make no sense to have a newborn screening test that costs $50 when there's already another 20 other newborn screenings that are mandated in the United States. You can see that it becomes, from a healthcare system perspective, prohibitive. So start now for newborn screening. You must be diligent. You must be vigilant and really prosecute the topic on a daily basis, because no single party will be capable of taking newborn screening forward alone. It's just not possible. It really is a case where it takes a village. And there are a lot of great examples in the past, and there are a lot of very recent examples that are taking forward newborn screening very robustly and very rapidly in a very different experience than what was even 10 and 15 years ago. Clearly, without doubt, we've already been talking about advocacy and education there to drive an understanding and understand how we can support the community in diagnosis better. But obviously, there's a level of engagement. And what I think I would say from some of the experiences certainly Sarah and I have had over the last 15 plus years, and it still holds true today, it's not just the KOL, it's not just the Center of Excellence. We all see general practitioners, right? We all have children who see pediatricians. We're going to see them, and even if we're diagnosed with a horrible disorder, such as ADA SCID, we're going to continue to see those physicians most often. It doesn't mean that we have the ability nor the resources to go out to every pediatrician. It just would not work. But we've got to go do the work to understand who is referring to the KOL, who is referring to the Center of Excellence, and make sure that we have a channel strategy, as presented earlier, to address the gaps in education, understand how they can teach us as well, to really make diagnosis relevant to as many parties as possible. So coordination of care. In an ex vivo setting, like a hematopoietic stem cell gene therapy using a lentiviral vector as we do, in the case of a CAR T, this is of the utmost criticality. There are really options and variables that go down into the tens and dozens for even each step of this. And I guess the first remark about coordination of care is to think about the following. First, I think we would all agree that it's really the patient and the family ultimately who need to be the focus and the center of our attention. And we should never let go of the fact that they need to know that we're there to support them. We can do that proactively, we can do that reactively, but we need to respect what their requests are. At the same time, in the background, what's also of criticality is we could lose sight really quickly of how many stakeholders are in fact involved in this diagram. And I think it helps actually, what we're finding, it goes toward reaching out to these stakeholders in this clinical treatment pathway will help actually in the end run when it comes to access, not just with payers, but also with institutions, because they'll better understand through our work and our partnership with all of these different stakeholders what is actually happening. So when it comes time, for a prior auth to be submitted here in the United States to a payer, and they see I'm actually working here with two institutions, not just one, they're going to be much more receptive because they're ready. They at least have an early state of education. Hopefully we've done a good job as industry in educating on what are the different procedures that they should expect to see in that prior auth, what are the different polypharmacy, not just in advance of the procedure, for the procedure, and in follow-up. And they'll also expect to see what are the follow-up expectations we have for this patient. As many of us are aware in the room, regulators have a tremendous expectation on how we need to be following these patients, and it surpasses a decade. At 15 years of follow-up data as a starting point in discussion with EMA and the FDA, we're not going to change that today, right? We're not changing that even on the 3rd of March, tomorrow. So we need to create an understanding with the clinicians, with the family, and with the system overall, right? What does that follow-up look like? How do we do it since we've given a potentially transformative and life-changing therapy in the most auspicious way with the least amount of healthcare system impact? Because we've hopefully also stopped and arrested or nearly eliminated all of the hospitalizations, as many frequent and diverse specialist appointments, and so on and so forth. So who are the stakeholders? I think you've heard who they are already, but in general terms, it's the local clinician, it's the local specialist, it's probably home nursing, it's likely, obviously, the Center of Excellence or the treatment center who's actually administering the therapy. It's all of the surrounding functions within that institution. It's the finance, it's procurement, it's the pharmacy, and what we're finding of grave importance is it's also the quality department or the compliance department who clearly understands process in a hospital. They're a key partner, I think, for industry. They're not ones that we've really partnered with in the past. They're ones that we've not well understood as probably what we call roadblocks, but in reality, they actually know the hospital system very well, and we need to learn from them, and we need to provide them solutions as well. So family support services, without doubt, given that we are not going to have our gene therapy is administered at 1,000 institutions, at least for the near future, across the U.S. and globally. It's something that we have become acutely familiar with in dealing with Strimvelis. OSR, TJET, and the Telethon Foundation do a fantastic job in doing this for Strimvelis, where it is only available in Milan. But patients from other countries within and outside the European Union are gaining access to and being treated with Strimvelis. So how do we take these learnings forward? We know that there's early onboarding and education. We're hearing that there are misconceptions and perceptions among a patient and a family, not just around with a clinician, but a patient and a family, what is entailed with both the reimbursement and also the administration of the therapy and all of the underlying logistics and potential complications and challenges. Because if we think about it, while a child may be treated, they're not potentially and likely the only child in that family. So how does a family both bring one child for a potentially curative therapy to Washington, D.C. on 1 week, but know they have 2 other children at home that they also need to care for, make sure that they get to school, make sure that they're doing their homework and they're getting to sport in the afternoon as well. So that is a critical focus for us, and it's very different. The lesson around family support, family services, every single case is different. Every single case is different. Where one family may have fantastic commercial insurance here and coverage here in the United States, another may have one child who is on a CHIP or Medicaid. So the diversity of the solutions that we have to be prepared for is really critical. And it doesn't mean that we're overwhelmed with that diversity, rather it means we have to really have a substrate, right? And then from that substrate, understand how do we adapt at the different points along the way, and how do we do the work early and in advance in the peri-launch period to understand what are some of the different preferences and the different needs that that family will have to have fulfilled by us or someone that we can refer them to. Travel logistics really can't say enough about this. We see this with Strimvelis. We have to deal with patients and families, not just within the European Union, who have to overcome a language, but also families who have to get visas. And there are times when you have a child who has a severe immune deficiency, many times can't leave a bubble, if you think about it practically speaking, getting them a visa and timing that along with trying to rectify an active infection prior to their travel and prior to gene therapy administration, it's of critical importance. Even here in the United States, look very closely at your own plan. We don't all have the same travel benefit. It's not even consistent from state to state with respect to Medicaid. And these are the types of details that matter to people. Because while one travel benefit may permit $10,000, which is sufficient for a family to go from Sacramento to San Francisco for treatment, and not just for cell harvest, but also administration, and then for follow-up visits within the same year. Another plan may only permit $10,000 for a one-time travel benefit. So how does that family address follow-up? How does that family address they need to bring all 3 of their children because they're all before school age and they don't have the care at home to deal with the practicalities? So can't really emphasize enough, there's so much around reimbursement when it comes to patient services, to family services, but it's the actual complexity of the gene therapy that we look to provide access to and work so hard on with respect to pricing and reimbursement. And we really need to make sure that we're accommodating people at the end of the day. So maybe just a few words around reimbursement and payment. This is a really practical and in-our-face 800-pound gorilla, as Chuck put it. Look, there's a lot of wonderful policy efforts that have made a lot of progress, not just in raising the volume of the topic area, but I think actually demystifying a lot. I think in the lay press, in the lay public, even within our industry, we have been dealing with chronic therapies for so long, and some of them have been truly fantastic, innovative, and life-changing. At the same time, we can become accustomed to this. And in the face of becoming accustomed to how we've worked for decades, right, we can be intimidated by and put a lot of clouds around gene therapy and what to do with respect to access. And a lot of these policy groups that have been described earlier this morning have done a great job at demystifying. At the same time, at Orchard, we look at the near term, really the immediate term, and the long term. In gene therapy to date, we are providing the most precise precision medicine. And what we believe in the short term is we've got to get to it. These therapies are available now. We have colleagues who have been bringing them to market for over a year and a half now, and there are going to be another 20 plus that are going to be on the market, we hope, over the next 10 to 15 year period. So we've got to deal with the practicality now of how do we get these therapies to people through the system, the policy, the regulations that we have today. And in having a precise medicine, we have to have precision options. And we know that not all payers, we know that not all families, we know that not all institutions are created the same, nor do they have the same needs. We have to go out, we have to listen to those needs. It's great to hear so early other colleagues pulling together payers in an ad board where we probably in the past would have had a payer ad board much, much closer to approval, much, much closer to launch because we did not want to let the cat out of the bag. We need to listen in this instance. We need to educate. And education doesn't mean we throw 50, 60 slides in front of a stakeholder immediately. It means giving them the information that they're able to digest at the moment. We're pulling this all together. It's of the utmost importance that you synchronize as an organization. I'm clearly being a little bit short on time, my apologies, but I think start now is really the best advice that we can give you. It's a lot of the same areas where you've been working in the past. At the same time, there's new complexity that you need to uncover and address in some of those very familiar spaces. Thank you very much.